Thanks, Gigi.
Whatever.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. It's nice to be back here with you again. Hope you all had a good holiday season, quiet, like Tim just said, quiet and peaceful, and a Happy New Year. So I thought this afternoon what we would do is finish the two passages in Isaiah that we didn't get to last time. And if we finish them, then we will start the creation stories from the book of Genesis. So we may or may not start them. And if we don't start them, we'll start them next month. Okay, so, and I gave you the papers for them. So if you remember in the book of Isaiah, anybody remember how many chapters? 66. That's very good, that's close. Okay. And did the same person write all those 66 chapters? No. So we have first Isaiah, who is purported to be the author of the first 39 chapters. And the first 39 chapters were written before the Babylonian exile. And when the people were beginning to be unfaithful or continuing to be unfaithful to the covenant and to the law and to God's promptings in their lives. So Isaiah sometimes can sound, in those first 39 chapters, a little judgmental, but he also gives them hope. Then chapters 40 through 55 were written actually during the exile. And so God is trying to comfort them. God is trying to tell them that it will come to an end. And second Isaiah is the person whoever he is purported to have written those 15 or 16 chapters, 40 through 55. And one of them is chapter 40, verses 1 to 11, which we did not look at last time, but we're going to look at it today. And then in third Isaiah is simply chapters 56 through 66. And that is well after the exile, when the Israelites are back home in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and they are rebuilding. So 56 to 66 are chapters of restoration, rebuilding, new life, and new hope. 40 through 55 is the actual exile, going through it, and then near the end of 40 through 55, knowing that it's coming to an end, and the signs of hope that come up. So in your little booklet, the first chapter that we're going to look at is Isaiah. It's on the page is numbered as a 9. It's Isaiah 40, 1 to 11. Give comfort to my people, says your God. Speak to the heart of Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her service has ended, that her guilt is expiated, that she has received from the hand of the Lord double for all her sins. A voice proclaims, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the wasteland a highway for our God. You see, these are preparations for when the exile will be over. Get ready to make a trip home. Make straight in the wasteland a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, every mountain and hill made low. The rugged land shall be a plain, the rough country a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Go up onto a high mountain, Zion, herald of good news. Cry out at the top of your voice, Jerusalem, herald of good news. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Here comes with power the Lord God, who rules by his strong arm. Here is his reward with him, his recompense before him. Like a shepherd, he feeds his flock. In his arms he gathers the lambs, carrying them in his bosom, leading the ewes with care. Besides hearing this passage sometimes during Advent, where else might you hear this passage? or many lines from it.
It's the text of the Messiah, pretty much. There's several selections from there.
Yes, it's the text of Handel's Messiah. Okay, he wrote it mainly on the different texts of Isaiah, and also the part about King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that famous part, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's from the book of Revelation. But most of the rest of it is from the prophecies about the Messiah in Isaiah. So this is the beginning of chapter 40, the first 11 verses. What immediately preceded this was chapter 39, of course. And in that chapter, a new king, a new Babylonian king, sent representatives to Jerusalem, bringing all kinds of gifts to the king of the Israelites in Jerusalem. His name was Hezekiah, and Hezekiah fell for it. He didn't, usually when someone brings you unusual gifts, unusually expensive gifts, unusual amounts of gifts, you become a little suspicious, at least I would. Why is this person, whom I hardly know maybe, giving me all these gifts? But Hezekiah falls for it and discloses to him and his attendants all the resources of his own treasury, what he has, the goods that he has purchased in commercial enterprise, etc., and his armory. He discloses everything. It was a foolish thing to do. Now, theologically, we can think that Hezekiah has turned away from Yahweh to a more concrete form of security in these possessions. And maybe we think theologically, he's placing his trust in these Babylonians. Then still in chapter 39, Isaiah, first Isaiah, who wrote this passage, warns Hezekiah that his people and the royal house are going to be deported to Babylon. And it seems that the promise has run out to the Israelites, and the possibility of the Davidic monarchy is terminated. That's the way it looks. So this chapter serves to put the Babylonian threat front and center, and to announce the coming deportation that is going to really involve the end of political Jerusalem. Then after chapter 39, which comes right before our chapter here, there's a break in the writing. And the break is about 150 years. And this break gives witness to Yahweh's intention to do something new for the exiles and for the formation of Judaism, which emerged after the exile. So at the end of about those 150 years, the person we know as second Isaiah begins this message of comfort, just as the Babylonian Empire was about to collapse because of the Persians. The Persians got mad because the Babylonians had so much power for so long, and so Persian King Cyrus came and just took over, and he was in charge of the people in exile. This book and this passage especially, but the whole book, is filled with wonderful promises, as we just heard some in those first 11 verses. But these promises are addressed only to people in exile who have seen their city fall. That's who it's addressed to. Second Isaiah was able to see Persia under this new Persian King Cyrus as an agent of Yahweh and restoration. So Isaiah here is writing really to a community that feels alienated because of the power of Babylon and the way Babylon shaped the definition of reality. The culture of Babylon shaped the Jews, just as they shaped everyone else in the empire. So it was the intent of the empire in Babylon to talk the Jews out of Jewish perceptions of reality, out of how things should be done, and into Babylonian definitions of reality, and to define life in terms of those values. But now Yahweh wants Israel to leave that empire and its values, and he sends Cyrus, a pagan, a non-believer, a non-Jew, to accomplish the release of those who have been displaced. And I often think, we live in an empire too. we might call it in a political theater, in a country, in a country run by a government, etc. We live in that's our empire. Right? And isn't it true that sometimes the empire tries to reshape our values and our fears and our dreams in ways that are fundamentally opposed to the ways of the gospel? That is true. And if we don't feel that opposition, then we're not really living the gospel. If we feel that everything is going along fine and the values all around me are fine, then we become part of it. And that's what happened to some of the Jews in Babylon. Babylon tried to reshape their values, and in many ways they were successful. But there were some that didn't go for it. They just didn't go for it. This is not who we are. This is not what Yahweh has allowed us to experience of his love. So the exile is not only a geographical fact, it's also a theological decision to be in exile. We can be in exile, see these values of the empire all around us, and still hold on to the values of the gospel and the values of family and society that we hold dear. Or we can be in exile and say, I'm just going to go along with it. I'm just going to pray the way they tell me to pray. I'm going to go to the temple they tell me to go to or not to go to. I'm just going to go along with it. And so the Jews had that same situation. So the whole chapters, all those chapters of 2nd Isaiah, are governed by 3 metaphors. Exile is one of them. It's a sense of not belonging when you feel you're exiled. And you could be in the middle of New York City and still feel that you're in exile, still feel that you're abandoned, that you're alone. It's the feeling of being in an environment that's hostile to your values. That's exile. And some of the exiles are the ones who refuse to accept the new situation. And while they were there, someone, maybe a community, wrote Psalm 137. I'm going to read it to you. It's a beautiful psalm, but you have to know the background. They're in exile. They've been taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. They've been saturated with Babylonian values and food and culture and pagan worship and the way the Babylonians do things. And this is what the Israelites say in Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat, weeping, when we remembered Zion, which is another name for Jerusalem. So there they are crying when they think back of Jerusalem, their beloved city that has just been completely destroyed. On the poplars in its midst in Babylon, we hung up our harps. For there our captors asked us for the words of a song. Our tormentors asked us for joy. Sing for us a song of Zion. But this is said in a very mocking, ridiculing way. We're your captors. We're your captors now. Oh, you hung up your harps on the trees. Sing us one of your religious songs. But they're making fun. And the psalm goes on, but how could we sing a song of the Lord in a foreign land? They can't do it. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget. May my tongue stick to my palate if I do not remember you and exalt Jerusalem beyond all delights. Remember, Lord, that day at Jerusalem. They said, level it down to its foundations. Desolate daughter Babylon, you shall be destroyed. Blessed the one who pays you back what you have done to us. And this last verse, which you will never hear in church, but it's in the Bible. Blessed the one who seizes your children and smashes them against the rocks. But that's how they felt. Okay? That the Babylonians had done this to them. And one of these months we'll have a lesson on the Psalms and why those lines are in there and what it would mean if they weren't in there. But they're in there for today. Okay, I won't get into that today because that'll take up a long time. So they felt completely alone. I had an inmate in Hartford jail once who was on trial, and then somebody found out that he committed a crime in Virginia, and he had to be transported to Virginia for his trial there. And while he was there, he wrote to me. I was living in Hartford at the time, and he said, "I feel like I'm in a foreign country, and this foreign country is hostile. There are no Catholics in this prison, Sister Marianne, and there's no Catholic service." He said, "I can't wait to get back to the Northeast, where we had Catholic service every week." That's what I was saying to myself during the early days of the pandemic. I can't wait until this thing is over. No Mass, no Eucharist, I feel abandoned. And then things started to get better. But at first, and it wasn't for that long, maybe a couple of months, okay? And these Israelites were there for 70 years. That's a long time. But they didn't forget. They refused to forget. They wrote these very poignant psalms during the exile. So that's the first metaphor that second Isaiah is governed by. The second one is Babylon itself, which refers to a concentration of power, not just the city of Babylon, not just the area of Babylon, but a concentration of power that's hostile to the covenant of faith. And this dominant power, whether it was in Babylon or whether it could be in our time, usually ends in some kind of oppression, usually. And the third metaphor that governs second Isaiah is homecoming. And that's a dramatic decision that somebody makes to break with the empire and embrace a place called home, where the values of faith have credibility and they are appreciated. And it doesn't matter whether the homecoming takes place in Babylon or back in Jerusalem. It did take place back in Jerusalem. But the idea of the metaphor of homecoming, it doesn't matter as long as you break with that empire. And it was easier for them to break with, Yahweh thought it was easier for them to break with the empire by sending Cyrus to get them out of Babylon, and he did. Okay, so exile, Babylon, and homecoming. And what we find in this passage, in the first verse, comfort, give comfort to my people, is a view of the divine kingdom that was widespread in the Near East in biblical times. I think when it's sung, it is sung, comfort, comfort ye, my people, right? Comfort ye, my people. Now, this can be interpreted to address all of us, that we are charged to bringing comfort to those in darkness. But comfort ye in the Hebrew is addressed to, most biblical scholars think it's addressed to a divine council, members of the divine council, who were part of the government of Yahweh in heaven, who attended to Yahweh, and Yahweh presided over them. They think that this comfort ye my people is addressed to all of these gods and goddesses. Because remember, this was still a polytheistic society. Many Israelites they were worshiping Yahweh. They believed in the one God, but they hadn't forgotten about all those other gods. That's hard to forget. If you've been brought up that way, it's very hard to forget. I think just like a Baptist person who converts to Roman Catholicism doesn't forget how different the Baptist preachers are from the homilies that they hear in the Catholic Church. The Baptists will preach for an hour, maybe longer. And the priests, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most. And people think that's too long. But this word ye, this plural word ye, portrays the deliberations of this assembly of gods that was believed at that time to govern the universe. Yahweh presided over it, the Israelites believed. There was one God who presided over it. But for many years, they were a polytheistic community, and that was very difficult, as I said, to leave behind. Okay, so the writers continue to use the symbolism of the divine council because gradually the Israelites were led to see that it was the one God that proved to be committed to justice and the protection of the vulnerable, with the result that they ended up believing that all the gods up there were stripped of their power completely except Yahweh, leaving Yahweh alone as the sovereign of all the nations. So Israel came to believe in monotheism very gradually. And you know, the scriptures never deny that there are other gods. Someday we'll do the story of Elijah and his successor Elisha. We'll do that story, and the story where Elijah says, okay, you call on your gods and I'll call on my God. And whoever responds first wins. Okay, and it's a very interesting, you know that story, Gigi? Yeah, and it's a very interesting story. We'll do that someday. It's a narrative story. It's not hard to understand. But the theology under it is very, very interesting. So 2nd Isaiah, comfort, comfort my people, opens with this series of commands. Comfort, speak, prepare the way of the Lord. It opens with these commands given to the council of the gods. So Yahweh's attitude toward Jerusalem now is completely positive, because in the first 39 chapters, there was a theme of judgment, along with some hope and love and care. But there was a theme of judgment. And now chapter 40 announces quite clearly the theme of deliverance. And it's important to remember that this decision does not depend upon Judah's desire to repent. And it does not depend on Babylon in any way. It's a decision made by Yahweh alone to send Cyrus the Persian in there and inspire him to let all people that had been deported